The moment I walked into my own cafe and heard them call me that cheap bastard, something in my chest went cold. Not angry cold, but the kind of cold you feel right before everything changes. I was standing in the back corner, still in the wrinkled polo I'd thrown on at 6 in the morning, holding a tray of fresh pastries I'd baked myself, when I heard Ashley's voice cut through the morning rush like a knife. "Did you see what he's paying us? My mom makes more at Walmart," she said to Jennifer, both of them stationed at the register, both of them completely unaware that the guy they were talking about was 3 feet away, hidden behind the tall shelving unit between the kitchen and the counter. I could see them clearly through the gap. Ashley, with her blonde ponytail pulled so tight her eyes looked permanently surprised. Jennifer, shorter and rounder, with that perpetual smirk that made customers either love her or ask for a different barista. I should have left. Should have turned around, gone back to the kitchen, pretended I'd never heard anything. But I stayed frozen, pastries getting cold in my hands, listening to 2 people I'd hired and trained and given raises to, twice, tear apart the man who'd been working 70-hour weeks to keep their paychecks coming. The sound of espresso machines and that indie coffee shop playlist tried to drown them out, but their voices found me like heat-seeking missiles. "And did you see how much he spent on his car?" Jennifer's voice turned into that mocking sing-sung tone people use when they're about to make fun of something. A 2003 Accord. Like, seriously? His cafe makes 40 grand a month, and he drives something that probably smells like old cheese. That was when I realized I didn't actually know who these people were. Not really. Not the versions of them that mattered. I thought I did. I thought I knew everyone who worked here. But standing there, invisible, I understood I was about to find out that nothing in my life was what I believed it to be. But to get here, to this exact moment, standing in my own business like a ghost, I need to take you back to when everything still made sense. Back to when I still believed that hard work meant something. My name is Michael Torres, and 6 months ago I was the happiest I'd ever been in my life. Not because everything was perfect, God knows it wasn't, but because I had finally built something that was entirely mine. The cafe was called The Grind, tucked into a strip mall between a dry cleaner and a tax preparation office on the corner of Madison and 5th in a suburb just outside Portland, Oregon. Not glamorous, not Instagram famous, but mine. Every espresso machine, every bag of beans, every stick of cinnamon I'd imported from a supplier in Colombia, mine. I'd spent the last 8 years building it from nothing. Literally nothing. I'd left my job in tech sales when I was 32, cashed out my 401k, yeah, I know, stupid move, my accountant wouldn't stop reminding me about it, and sunk everything into this place. My wife, Sarah, had been supportive about it, which at the time I thought meant she believed in me. Now I understand it meant she was busy texting someone else while I was at the bank signing loan papers. The cafe opened on a Tuesday in June, and I remember standing outside before we unlocked the doors for the first time, watching the sun come up, thinking about my dad. He'd worked construction his whole life, never owned anything, spent his evenings in the garage working on cars he'd never finish. I wanted something different. I wanted to walk into a place and know that I'd created it, that every decision, every dollar, every risk was mine. So I did. The first year was brutal. I did everything, making coffee, cleaning the bathrooms, managing the books, training staff. I'd come home at night smelling like espresso and burnt milk, my hands stained with coffee grounds that wouldn't wash out completely, my feet aching in a way that made me hobble up the stairs like I was 70 instead of 33. Sarah would have dinner ready sometimes, though increasingly often she'd just point to something in the fridge and say she had a work call with someone in Tokyo or Singapore or whatever time zone let her stay on her laptop until I was already asleep. But I didn't care about any of that. I was building something. By year 2, we were profitable. By year 3, we were expanding. I hired 5 employees. By year 4, 10. By year 5, we'd opened a second location 15 miles away in a different suburb. I was on track to open a third location by the end of this year. The margins were solid. The customers were loyal. I knew half of them by name. Mrs. Chen, who came in every morning at 7:15 and always ordered a macchiato. The group of college kids who studied at the corner table on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. The construction crew that showed up before dawn on weekends. The grind wasn't just a business to me. It was proof that the American dream wasn't completely dead. It was my middle finger to every person who'd ever told me I couldn't do something. And it was where I spent essentially all my time, which, as it turned out, was exactly the problem. Sarah and I had started drifting sometime around year 4. I didn't notice it at first, or maybe I did, and I just rationalized it. She was working longer hours. She'd moved to a different department at her accounting firm, something about tax strategy that required her to be in meetings until 7 or 8 at night. We'd stopped having dinner together. Then we'd stopped having breakfast together. Then we'd stopped sleeping in the same bed, first because she came home late and didn't want to wake me, then because she'd moved into the guest room for better sleep, and then because we just never talked about moving back and it became normal. I remember one specific morning about 3 months ago. I was getting ready to go open the cafe, moving around our bedroom in the dark so I wouldn't wake her, and she was already awake, sitting by the window with her laptop, the blue light making her face look like a stranger's face. She didn't even look at me, just typed and typed. I said, "Good morning," and she said, "Mm-hmm," without looking away from the screen. That moment, that "mm-hmm," that was the first real thorn. That was when something in me started to wonder if maybe I'd married someone I didn't actually know. But even that didn't make me suspicious about anything else. I just thought we'd drifted. Happens to people. We'd go to marriage counseling, or we'd take a vacation, or we'd have a conversation. People fixed these things. And I was busy, sure, but I was busy building something that mattered. That's what I told myself. The cafe mattered more than date nights. The cafe mattered more than noticing when my wife's work calls started happening from her car in the driveway, voice low, door locked. The cafe mattered more than the little things that, if I'm being honest, I noticed but didn't want to investigate. The new perfume she wore sometimes. The way her phone would light up with notifications and she'd quickly flip it face down. The fact that she'd suddenly started going to the gym 4 times a week when she'd previously gone maybe once a month. The way she'd started getting her hair done every 3 weeks instead of every 6 weeks. But I was tired, and I was happy with the work, and I didn't want to be one of those paranoid husbands who reads into everything. So I didn't read into it. I just kept opening the cafe at 5 in the morning and closing it at 8 at night, and doing the books in the back office until 10 or 11. And I told myself that when things slowed down, when I got the 3rd location open, when we hit the 1-year mark of profitability on location 2, when I could finally hire a manager to run things, then everything would be fine. That was my plan. That was what I believed would fix everything that was slowly breaking in my marriage and in my life, which is probably the dumbest thing I've ever believed, and I've believed some pretty stupid things. Ashley and Jennifer were hired 4 months ago, right around the time Sarah stopped coming to the cafe altogether. I'd asked her to come by one afternoon just to see what we'd built, and she'd made some excuse about a client lunch. She never did come. But these two, I remembered their first day of training like it was yesterday. Ashley had just moved back to Portland after 2 years in Seattle, working retail, and she needed a job that wasn't customer-facing in some department store. Jennifer was working on her degree in business management and needed something flexible. Both were smart. Both were quick learners. Both seemed grateful for the opportunity. I'd paid them $18 an hour to start, which, I thought, was decent for entry-level cafe work in this area. I'd given them both a raise after 2 months because they were good workers, and I wanted to keep good people. I'd covered their shifts when they called in sick. I'd let them rearrange their schedules around their lives. I'd even given them both a 5% raise 3 weeks ago because I was feeling good about the numbers and because I wanted my employees to feel valued. Apparently, I was a cheap bastard anyway. I stood there with the pastries getting colder in my hands, and I felt something shift inside my chest. Not anger yet. Anger would come later. This was something different. This was the first moment of a much larger realization. This was the moment when I started to understand that the world I'd constructed, my successful cafe, my marriage, my relationships with the people I trusted, was not actually built on anything solid at all. And then Jennifer laughed, that sharp, mean laugh that bounces off bathroom tiles, and she said something that made me finally move. She said something about how she'd heard through the grapevine that the boss had been having financial troubles, that maybe the cafe wasn't doing as well as people thought, that maybe I was in over my head, that maybe the 3rd locations wasn't happening after all. That was when I realized someone was talking about my business. Someone was spreading rumors. And whoever that someone was, they had information they shouldn't have had. I turned and walked back through the kitchen, pushed open the back door and stood in the alley behind the cafe, breathing hard, the pastries still in my hands, wondering how the hell everything had gotten so far away from what I thought it was. I stood in the alley for what felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes. The pastries had gone completely cold, and I finally threw them in the dumpster, a gesture that felt symbolic of something I couldn't quite name yet. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Sarah. "Working late again? Don't wait for dinner." I didn't respond. I couldn't. Because I was standing in an alley behind my own business, holding the fragments of a life I thought I understood, and nothing made sense anymore. That night, I didn't go back inside the cafe. I called in one of my managers to close up, made some excuse about a supply issue, and drove home in a fog. The house was dark when I arrived. Sarah's car was in the driveway, but the lights were all off except for the glow of her laptop in the master bedroom. I could see her silhouette from the street, hunched over, typing furiously. I sat in the car for 20 minutes, engine off, just watching. When she finally closed the laptop and moved toward the guest room instead of staying in bed, I got out of the car and went inside. "Hey," I said, trying to sound normal, trying to sound like the Michael who hadn't just heard his employees call him a cheap bastard. Sarah jumped, her hand flying to her chest. "Jesus, you scared me. I didn't hear you come in." There was something in her voice, relief mixed with something else. Irritation, maybe. Or guilt. I was starting to understand that I'd become someone who looked for guilt in every interaction. "We need to talk," I said, and I watched her face carefully. She closed her laptop completely, set it aside on the nightstand, and turned to face me. In the dim light from the hallway, I could see that she'd gotten her hair done recently, cut and styled in a way I'd never seen before. New perfume, too. The same perfume I'd smelled on her before but had never asked about. "What's wrong?" she asked, and her voice was steady. Too steady. Like she'd rehearsed this moment. I sat on the edge of the bed, careful to maintain distance between us. "How's work really going?" I asked. It was a test question, a way to see if she'd lie or tell me something true. She blinked, and I saw a micro-expression cross her face. Calculation, I think. The look of someone deciding which version of the truth to tell. "It's fine. Busy. Why?" She pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. A defensive posture. I'd learned to read those by now. "You seem different," I said carefully. "You've seemed different for a while now." She didn't answer immediately. She just looked at me with an expression that was almost pitying, which made my chest tighten. "Is there someone else?" I asked, and the words hung in the air between us like poison gas. I watched her face, watched it carefully, looking for the truth in the micro-expressions, the eye movements, the way her jaw clenched for just a fraction of a second. "Michael," she said finally, and her voice was gentle in a way that made it worse. "I don't think that's really what you want to know." She was right. I didn't want to know about another man. I wanted to know if everything I'd built, the marriage, the life, the assumption that we were partners in something, was real. I wanted to know if I'd been lying to myself the entire time. "The cafe," she continued, and there was something else in her voice now, something harder underneath the gentleness. "You care about that more than you care about anything else. More than you care about me. You've cared about it more for years." I stood up abruptly. "That's not fair. I did everything for us. I built that business so we could have security, so we could have a good life." She laughed, a short, bitter sound that echoed in the quiet house. "Did you?" she asked. "Or did you build it for you? Because from where I'm sitting, you built it so you could feel like you were a success, so you could feel important. And I was just here. I was just the wife you came home to smell like espresso and regret." I wanted to argue with her. I wanted to defend myself. But somewhere in the middle of her words, I realized something terrible. She was right. The cafe had become my identity. It had become the thing I loved more than my marriage, more than my wife, more than anything else in my life. And that love had been convenient because it was easier to love a business than to love a person. A business doesn't require vulnerability. A business doesn't require you to be present. A business just requires you to work and to believe that the work is enough. I want a divorce, Sarah said quietly, and those 4 words landed like a brick through a window. I stared at her, waiting for her to say she was joking, waiting for the punchline that never came. Instead, she picked her laptop back up and opened it again, effectively dismissing me. I've already talked to a divorce attorney. I have documentation of the business finances. I have copies of the bank statements. I have everything I need. We can do this amicably, or we can do this ugly. But either way, it's happening. I left the room without saying anything else. I couldn't trust my voice not to break, and I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of seeing me fall apart. Instead, I went downstairs to the kitchen and made a pot of coffee. Strongjin, dark, the way I'd learned to make it when I first opened the cafe. I sat at the kitchen table in the dark, hands wrapped around the mug. And I understood for the first time that the person I should have been investigating wasn't my employees. It was my wife. It was the woman I'd been sleeping next to for 8 years while she slowly, methodically documented every detail of my financial life. By the time the sun came up, I had made a decision. I wasn't going to fight about the divorce. That wasn't what mattered anymore. What mattered was understanding who had told my wife about my business finances. What mattered was understanding how she knew so much about the cafe's profitability when I'd never discussed numbers with her, not since we'd stopped having real conversations somewhere around year 4. And what mattered was understanding why Jennifer and Ashley were spreading rumors about my financial troubles when, as far as I knew, I'd never discussed my business with either of them. I drove to the cafe at 4 in the morning, before anyone else arrived. I went into my office and locked the door. Then I pulled out my laptop and opened the business server. I started reviewing the access logs from the past 6 months. What I found made my blood go cold. Someone had been logging into the system from an external IP address, accessing financial records, pulling reports, downloading spreadsheets. The access pattern was consistent, always during my lunch break, always lasting about 30 minutes, always pulling the same files. I traced the IP address, and it came back to a coffee shop 3 blocks away. Then I opened my email and did something I should have done weeks ago. I searched for every email Sarah had sent me mentioning the cafe, the business, finances, anything. There were 43 emails. I clicked on the earliest one, dated 8 months ago. The subject line was, "Need to talk about some financial concerns." I opened it, and my stomach dropped. She'd written, "I ran into Jennifer from your cafe at the gym. She mentioned that you might be having trouble with the second location. I'm worried about our future. Can we talk about what's really going on with the business?" Jennifer. She'd known Jennifer. And Jennifer had been giving my wife information about my business. I pulled up Jennifer's employee file, and there it was, under emergency contact, in the space where employees list family members or close friends. Sarah Torres, friend. They'd listed each other. They'd known each other before Jennifer even applied for the job. The implications hit me like a truck. Jennifer had been hired, possibly deliberately. Jennifer had access to the financial information because I'd trusted her to work the register, to close the safe, to have the general sense of how the business was doing. And Jennifer had been reporting everything to Sarah, who was using that information to build a case for the divorce, to document my assets, to prove what the business was worth so she could take half of it, or more. I sat in my office for another 2 hours just processing. When the sun finally came up properly and I could see the cafe opening, I made my move. I called the business lawyer I'd used to set up the LLC when I first opened, a woman named Patricia Chen, who'd handled the paperwork and whom I'd paid thousands of dollars to protect my interests. I told her everything. I told her about the unauthorized access to the server. I told her about Jennifer and Sarah knowing each other. I told her about the emails, and I told her about the rumors spreading among my employees. "You need to document everything," Patricia said, her voice taking on that sharp legal edge. "Can you pull the server logs? Can you show the access patterns? Can you prove the connection between Jennifer and Sarah?" I told her yes. "Good," she said. "Send me everything. Don't confront anyone yet. Not until we understand exactly what we're dealing with. This could be industrial espionage, Michael. This could be fraud. We need to be very careful about how we handle this." I spent the next 3 hours pulling documents, exporting files, creating a comprehensive record of every unauthorized access to my business systems. By the time I was done, I had a clear timeline. Jennifer had been hired 6 months ago. 2 weeks after Jennifer started, the unauthorized access to the server began. For the past 4 months, someone had been accessing the system using Jennifer's login credentials. Credentials that she would have given to Sarah, I realized now. They'd done it carefully, never accessing anything unusual, just the financial reports that an employee might legitimately look at. But they'd done it consistently, building a picture of my business that was complete and damning. I emailed Patricia everything, and then I sat back in my chair, feeling something shift inside me. The anger that I'd suppressed in the alley was finally breaking through. But it wasn't the hot, explosive kind of anger. It was cold. It was focused. It was the kind of anger that doesn't waste energy on feeling. It wastes energy on planning. My phone buzzed. It was Ashley texting from the front. "Is everything okay? Jennifer called in sick again. Can you come help with the rush?" I stared at the message for a long moment. Jennifer calling in sick. Of course she was. She knew something was wrong. Maybe Sarah had warned her. Maybe Sarah had told her that I'd come home, that I'd confronted her, that the game was up. Or maybe Jennifer was just being cautious, staying away until she understood what was happening. I texted back, "I'm coming up now." Then I closed my laptop, took a deep breath, and walked out of my office. When I stepped into the main cafe area, I saw Ashley at the register, looking harried, with a line of customers waiting. I caught her eye and I gestured for her to come over for a moment. She excused herself and came around the counter looking worried. "I need to ask you something," I said quietly, keeping my voice low so the customers couldn't hear. "How long have you known Jennifer?" Ashley blinked, clearly confused by the question. Since she started working here? Like 4 or 5 months? Why?" I studied her face, looking for any sign that she was lying, any sign that she was part of whatever this was. But I didn't see it. She just looked confused and concerned, the way an innocent person looks when they're being asked a strange question. "Has she ever talked to you about me? About the business? About my personal life?" Ashley's confusion deepened. "No, not really. I mean, she complains about the pay sometimes, but so do I. We all do. Is this about what you heard earlier?" "I'm sorry about that, by the way. I shouldn't have." "No, it's fine," I said, and I meant it. In a strange way, hearing them complain had been the best thing that could have happened. It had forced me to look at my business with fresh eyes. It had forced me to look at my life with fresh eyes. And it had led me here, to this moment where I understood that I'd been betrayed by the 2 people closest to me, but in very different ways. "Just forget about it. I'm going to help with the rush. You take a break." As I moved to the register and started making drinks, muscle memory taking over, I thought about what came next. Patricia would need time to build the case. The lawyer would need to understand the full scope of the conspiracy. And I would need to gather more evidence, documentation that would stand up in court, that would prove what Sarah and Jennifer had done, that would protect my business and my assets. But first, I needed to understand why. Why had Sarah done this? Why had she decided to take this route instead of just asking for a divorce? The answer, I realized, was probably simpler than I wanted it to be. Money. She wanted half the business, or more. She wanted security. She wanted to make sure that when we split, she walked away with enough that she'd never have to depend on anyone again. And Jennifer had probably been motivated by a combination of things. Money, Sarah had probably paid her for the information. Resentment, the pay really was lower than she wanted. And maybe something else I didn't yet understand. The morning rush lasted until about 11, and by then I was running on fumes and rage. I decided to close the cafe early. I told Ashley that we were doing inventory, that I needed to do some system updates, that we'd reopen tomorrow. She didn't argue, she just clocked out and left, heading home to whatever life she had outside of this place. When she was gone, I locked the front doors and flipped the sign to closed. Then I sat at one of the customer tables, in the spot where I usually saw Mrs. Chen ordering her morning macchiato, and I thought about what I'd built here. This cafe had been my dream. It had been my identity. And in pursuit of it, I'd lost my marriage, alienated my employees, and missed the fact that the people closest to me were conspiring against me. But I wasn't going to lose it now. Not to Sarah, not to Jennifer, Not to anyone. My phone rang. It was Patricia. "I've reviewed everything you sent," she said without preamble. "This is significant. The unauthorized access is provable. The connection between Jennifer and Sarah is documented, and the timing is very convenient. I'm going to need you to do a few more things. First, I need you to change your server passwords immediately. Second, I need you to place Jennifer on administrative leave, pending an investigation into the unauthorized access. And third, I need you to consult with an accountant about protecting your business assets before the divorce proceedings formally begin." "Can I confront Sarah?" I asked. Patricia was quiet for a moment. "Not yet," she said finally. "Let me file some preliminary motions first. Let me get the evidence in front of a judge. Then we'll have leverage. Right now, if you confront her, you're just tipping your hand. You're giving her time to destroy evidence or cover her tracks more carefully." So I waited. For 3 days I waited. I changed the server passwords. I placed Jennifer on leave. She sent me an angry text about it, demanding to know why, and I didn't respond. I met with an accountant who helped me understand my financial exposure and how to protect the business. And I came home each night to a house where Sarah was pretending that nothing had changed, that she was still just a wife working late, still just a woman who had drifted away from her husband through the natural entropy of a failing marriage. The 4th day was a Friday. Patricia called me at the cafe. "I've filed the motion," she said. "The judge has granted a temporary injunction against the unauthorized access to your business systems. I've also filed a notice of discovery that includes evidence of the conspiracy. Sarah's attorney will be receiving copies today. I suggest you prepare yourself for a confrontation." I actually laughed when she said that. Prepare myself, as if preparation was possible, as if I could somehow brace myself for the moment when the woman I'd married would have to confront the fact that I knew what she'd done. But I did try. That evening, I made sure I was home before Sarah got there. I made dinner, something simple, nothing fancy, just pasta and salad and some wine I'd been saving. When Sarah came through the door, she immediately sensed something was different. "What's going on?" she asked warily, setting down her work bag. "Why are you home so early?" "Why do you look like you want to murder someone?" I gestured to the table. "Sit down," I said. "We need to talk." She sat slowly, her eyes scanning my face, looking for clues about what was coming. "I know about Jennifer," I said quietly. "I know about the server access. I know about the emails. I know about the conspiracy." I watched her face cycle through a series of emotions: shock, calculation, and finally, resignation. She reached for the wine and poured herself a glass with a steady hand. "Okay," she said. "So you know. What are you going to do about it?" "I'm going to fight you," I said flatly. "I'm going to prove that you committed fraud. I'm going to make sure that Jennifer faces consequences for the unauthorized access. And I'm going to walk away from this marriage with my business intact." Sarah actually smiled at that. It was a small, sad smile, but it was there. "You think you can prove it," she said. It wasn't a question. "You think you have the evidence. But Michael, you're forgetting something." She leaned forward, and there was something almost pitying in her expression. "I've had 6 months to prepare for this. I have documentation of every unethical practice you've used to run that cafe. I have records of the safety violations. I have copies of the health department complaints that you settled quietly. I have evidence that you've been skimming cash from the register. Do you really want to go to war with me? Because I promise you, you won't like what comes out." My blood went cold. Not because I'd done those things, I hadn't, but because I understood in that moment that Sarah would lie, that she would fabricate evidence, that she would do whatever it took to win. And the worst part was, she probably believed her own lies by now. She'd probably convinced herself that I was the villain in this story, that I deserved what was coming to me. "You're lying," I said quietly. Sarah shrugged and took another sip of wine. "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe I'm not. Maybe you have forgotten some of the corners you've cut to keep that business afloat. Maybe you have forgotten some of the questionable decisions you've made. Either way, it doesn't matter, does it? Because now it's he said, she said. And I have Jennifer to corroborate my story. I have emails. I have documentation. And you have," she paused, looking at me with cold eyes, What? Your pride? I stood up and walked away from the table. I couldn't look at her anymore. I went upstairs to the bedroom and I sat on the edge of the bed where we'd slept together for 8 years, where we'd made love and had conversations and shared space. And I understood that I was married to someone I didn't know at all. The woman downstairs wasn't my wife. She was a stranger who happened to live in my house. My phone buzzed. A text from Patricia. "Don't react. Don't engage. Let her move first. We'll be ready." I texted back a simple thumbs-up emoji. Then I put the phone away and I waited for Sarah to make her next move. But she didn't come upstairs. She just finished her wine and went to the guest room, closing the door quietly behind her, leaving me alone with my thoughts and my rage, and my understanding that everything I'd built, both the cafe and the marriage, had been built on a foundation of delusion. The next morning, Patricia's office called. Sarah's attorney had filed a counterclaim alleging exactly what Sarah had described to me: safety violations, health code violations, fraudulent accounting practices. It was all lies, or mostly lies, but the point wasn't truth. The point was creating enough doubt, enough mess, enough complexity that the judge would be inclined to split everything down the middle just to make the case go away. But Patricia had anticipated this. "We have affidavits from your employees," she said. "We have health department records that show no violations. We have accountant statements that verify your books are clean. And most importantly, we have the server logs." The fact that she prepared these accusations after learning what you know about the conspiracy is itself evidence of her intent to commit fraud. I felt a small spark of hope at that. Patricia was good. Patricia was the kind of lawyer who understood how to fight dirty when necessary, but who also understood the law well enough to do it within bounds. "What happens now?" I asked. Patricia took a breath. "Now," she said, "we go to court. We present the evidence. And we let the judge decide who's telling the truth." The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out. For those 3 weeks, I lived in a state of suspended animation. I went to the cafe every day. I trained the new hire I brought in to replace Jennifer. I served coffee to Mrs. Chen and the college kids and the construction crew, and I pretended that my life wasn't falling apart. I came home every evening to a house that had become a war zone, not because of fighting, but because of the complete absence of anything resembling a relationship. Sarah didn't speak to me unless necessary. I didn't speak to her unless necessary. We moved around each other like ghosts, careful not to make contact, careful not to acknowledge the presence of the other. It was worse than any fight could have been. It was the complete dissolution of the idea that we'd ever been partners in anything. The night before the hearing, I went to the cafe and sat in the back office until dawn, just going over everything one more time. The server logs, the emails, the timeline of Jennifer's employment and the unauthorized access, the connection between Sarah and Jennifer. It was all there. It was all solid. It was all provable. And yet, I was terrified. Not of losing the hearing. Patricia was confident we had a strong case. I was terrified of what losing the hearing might mean. If Sarah won, if she somehow managed to convince the judge that I was the villain in this story, then everything I'd built would be destroyed. Not just the cafe, but my reputation, my credibility, my sense of self. But as dawn broke over the cafe, as the first light of the morning came through the windows and illuminated the espresso machines and the pastry case and the tables where customers would soon sit, I realized something. My sense of self wasn't built on this cafe. My sense of self had been built on the delusion that I could control everything, my business, my marriage, my life, through sheer force of will and hard work. And that delusion had been shattered the moment I heard Ashley and Jennifer talking behind the counter. So maybe the cafe didn't matter. Maybe losing it would be a relief. Maybe what mattered was that I could stand in front of a judge and tell the truth. That I could prove that I'd been wronged, but that I hadn't done anything wrong. That I could walk away from this with my integrity intact, even if I walked away with nothing else. With that thought firmly in my mind, I drove home, showered, put on a suit, and went to meet Patricia at the courthouse. The hearing lasted 4 hours. Sarah testified first, telling a story about a husband who'd neglected her, who'd chosen his business over their marriage, who'd made questionable financial decisions and tried to hide them from her. Some of it was true. Most of it was selective truth, facts presented in a way that distorted their meaning. Jennifer testified next, describing the access to the server as something she'd done reluctantly, only because Sarah had asked her to, only because she was worried about my mental health and whether the business was sustainable. Then it was my turn. I told the judge about the cafe. I told her about the 8 years of work, the loans, the risk, the nights I'd spent in the office doing the books. I told her about the slow dissolution of my marriage, about the moment I realized my wife was a stranger. And I told her about the moment I discovered the conspiracy, the unauthorized access, the connection between Sarah and Jennifer, the emails that proved they'd been working together. Patricia presented the evidence, the server logs, the IP addresses, the emails, the timeline, the accountant's verification of my clean books, the health department records showing no violations, the affidavits from my employees, including one from a reluctant Ashley, who testified that Jennifer had asked her several times about the cafe's financial situation. And then Patricia presented the final piece of evidence, a recorded phone call between Sarah and Jennifer, dated 2 days before Sarah filed the divorce papers. In the call, Jennifer asked if Sarah was ready to move forward with the plan. Sarah responded that she was, that she needed to make sure everything was documented before Michael figured out what was happening. The judge listened to the entire 4-minute conversation, her expression growing harder and colder with each passing second. When the recording ended, the judge looked at Sarah with an expression of pure contempt. "It appears to me," she said coldly, "that the defendant has engaged in a conspiracy to commit fraud against the plaintiff. The unauthorized access to the business systems is provable. The intent to harm is evident from the recording. The allegations made in the counterclaim appear to be fabrications designed to obscure the defendant's own criminal activity." She turned to me. "Mr. Torres, I'm ordering that the business remain entirely in your possession. I'm ordering that the defendant pay restitution for the unauthorized access and the costs of this litigation. And I'm ordering that the defendant's counterclaim be dismissed with prejudice. As for the divorce itself, given the nature of the defendant's conduct, I'm ordering a settlement that gives you the house and 60% of the marital assets. You're entitled to more, but I assume you'd like to conclude this matter quickly." I felt Patricia's hand squeeze my shoulder. It was over. The judge had believed me. The judge had understood what Sarah had done. And Sarah was sitting next to her attorney with her jaw clenched, her face pale, understanding that she'd just lost everything. The courtroom cleared slowly. Sarah gathered her things and left without looking at me. Jennifer was nowhere to be seen. She'd evidently decided not to wait for the verdict. And I stood in the hallway with Patricia, holding the papers that confirmed I'd won, and I felt absolutely nothing. "Congratulations," Patricia said, but there was something knowing in her voice. She'd handled enough divorce cases to understand that winning in court and winning in life were two very different things. "What will you do now?" I looked at the papers in my hands. "I'm going to go back to the cafe," I said, "and I'm going to decide if I still love it or if I only loved the idea of it." Patricia nodded. "Fair enough," she said. "Call me if you need anything else." I drove directly to the cafe. It was mid-afternoon and the place was quiet. Only a few customers sat at the tables, and Ashley was behind the counter, working solo. When she saw me, her face went pale. "The hearing?" she asked. I nodded. "You won," she said, not as a question, but as a statement. She'd probably already heard through the grapevine. Gossip traveled fast in small communities. "Yeah," I said. I won. I moved behind the counter and started making myself a cappuccino, the muscle memory taking over, my hands moving through the familiar motions without my brain having to direct them. The espresso machine hummed. The milk steamer hissed. I poured the milk into the espresso with a practiced motion, creating the perfect crema. And as I lifted the cup to my lips, I tasted something I hadn't tasted in a very long time. Peace. Not happiness. Not yet. But peace. "I'm sorry," Ashley said quietly. "For what we said. For complaining about the pay. I didn't know about Jennifer and your wife, but I still shouldn't have been so ungrateful." I shook my head. No, you were right, I said. I wasn't paying you fairly. I wasn't paying attention to what you needed. I was too busy building something for myself to notice that the people working for me were struggling. Ashley looked at me with surprise. So you're raising our pay? She asked hopefully. I smiled. Yeah, I'm raising your pay. And I'm hiring a manager so I'm not here 70 hours a week. And I'm going to close the cafe on Sundays so everyone gets a day off. And we're going to talk about benefits. What about the second location? Ashley asked. And the third location you were planning? I leaned against the counter holding my cappuccino, and I thought about that for a moment. I don't know yet, I said finally. I need to figure out what I actually want, not what I think I should want, but what I actually want. The cafe door opened and Mrs. Chen walked in. She looked at me with a slight smile. I heard about the hearing, she said. Everyone heard. Sarah's attorney was telling people in the parking lot that you'd won. She approached the counter. Good. You're a good man, Michael. You didn't deserve what she did to you. I made her cappuccino without being asked. I'd made it so many times that I could do it in my sleep. As I handed it to her, she put her hand on mine for a moment. You'll be okay, she said. You're strong. Stronger than you know. Then she paid and sat down at her usual table, and I understood that Mrs. Chen had been paying attention all along. She'd seen the dissolution of my marriage. She'd watched my wife stop coming to the cafe. She'd noticed the way I looked more exhausted each day. And she'd said nothing, just ordered her cappuccino and left her tip, and came back every morning because that was what loyalty looked like. That evening, I went home to the house that was now, officially and legally, mine. Sarah had already moved out. I found a note on the kitchen counter saying she'd taken some of her clothes and that she'd be back for the rest of the furniture on Saturday. I stood in the empty kitchen, and I felt the weight of 8 years of marriage settle on my shoulders like a physical thing. I'd been married to a stranger. I'd built a life with someone I didn't know, and I'd lost that life not because of anything I'd done, but because I'd been too busy working to notice it was disappearing. But I'd also survived it. I'd fought back, I'd proved the truth, and I'd come out the other side with my business intact and my reputation intact, and most importantly, with a clear understanding of who I was and what I actually wanted. I made myself a cup of coffee, the same coffee I made at the cafe but at home, in the quiet kitchen. I sat at the table where Sarah and I had eaten hundreds of meals together, and I drank it slowly, and I thought about the future. I thought about hiring a manager. I thought about closing on Sundays. I thought about finally having time to actually live my life, instead of just working it away. And I thought about the fact that sometimes the thing you have to lose in order to find yourself is the very thing you thought you'd built your life around. Sometimes you have to watch everything fall apart in order to understand what actually matters. The coffee was perfect. The cappuccino I'd made that afternoon had been perfect. The cafe was perfect. And finally, for the first time in 8 years, so was I.